Okay, so this brings us to camp number 7, which is the Delvis Mithril camp. So to foreshadow this one a little bit, you have to know something about what happened before the Delvis Mithril camp at the Club League. So at Club League, the adventurers had been trying to get the Crown to let them use the tools of Cragnalican, which are very powerful and useful against undead. They make undead cowardly. They they can any undead that tries to attack the wielder is pacified. They have a bunch of other abilities, but Crown didn't want to use them. Crown was really had this attitude of like, no, we don't, we don't want to use these tools because they might get destroyed. And so the sword members decided they would go to the Crown members and ask them if they could use them, and then they try to figure out who the holdouts were and why they wouldn't use them. So they talked to them, and they managed to convince the three holdouts, that they should use the tools. And one of the holdouts was Rokoshi Centris, who said she wouldn't want to use them. If she wanted to use them, they should be used in some kind of test to make sure they were safe to be used, and they should be used somewhere around Delvis Mithril, because that city is the city she's from, and she thinks that that's where they would be best used. And so they said they agreed, okay, we can do something around Delvis Mithril. That should be fine. So the other holdout they had was Neuroheim, and they said that they were really concerned about the Dagdioth threat, and if the tools were going to get used, they should be used against some sort of Dagdioth associated group, because that's what was really being a problem for them. And the sword member said, oh, we can manage that to happen, because there is both, Dagdrask is in around Delvis Mithril, and so is and Delvis Mithril is an area that we have to use them, so that makes 2 of those requirements. The last holdout was Warren, who she's from Oriri, and she was concerned about the item spirits themselves. She had a lot of interactions with item spirits and was concerned that item spirits would be upset or being mistreated by this effect. And so she said, if you're going to take these tools and you're going to use them, you have to use them with someone who's familiar with the way haunts work and who can take care of the haunts inside of them. And so they agreed to take Briar, who was an apprentice of Byron 10 and Pinnacle, to go and observe the haunts and make sure that they were not being escalated. And they gave the tools to a warrior of the Elder Goddess who rides a Pegasus to go into the encounter and test them out. So they went out, and Tor did this. They tested out the tools, and they worked really well. They kept all the undead from doing much, but they did run into a problem in that they discovered that when you use the tools, it costs you honor, and they weren't really aware of that when they were using it. So they ended up, the warrior of the Elder Goddess ends up dying from all the honor losses he has to spend by using all the attacks or things with the tools, and ends up PDing from that and getting really powerful at that intervention. So they've tested the tools down. They know how they work, but they're not sure how much they're going to use them in the future. So that brings us to the Delvis Mithril camp itself. So that happened weeks ago, and now they're in Delvis Mithril. And the use of the tools in the area has really aggravated the Dagdrask and Infernals. Also, the discovery of this demon-slaying sword has really aggravated the demons and Infernals, and so they are now common cause attacking Delvis Mithril to punish them for this assault. And so the characters initially start just in Dagdrask, in Delvis Mithril, fighting Dagdrask, discovering what the Crusaders of Atone can do, these different groups. They're realizing it's sort of being infiltrated by different groups. They don't know who those are. The Snowdrifts and the Frostfang veterans are trying to protect the area and keep people safe, but some of them are maybe compromised. They're not sure. Axioms is involved. Axioms is not really clear on. They're not really clear on whose side Axioms is on. Sometimes they're on the Dwarven side. Sometimes they're on the Dagdioth side, and so it seems like that's really not clear. So there's a lot of kind of not so sure who's on whose side. So they've managed to get to fight off a lot of Dagdrask troops. They're doing pretty good. They're discovering some really dangerous units, really dangerous troops that Dagdrask and Infernals use. Some of these really powerful troops. They're sort of discovering all these chess piece sort of maps which tell them where troop movements are and then how to attack them, and they're succeeding on the battlefield to some degree, but it seems like they're still sort of losing the war somehow. They're not really sure how that frames. But they do manage to discover this little dungeon, and they manage to get these golems out of it, and they sort of, when one day they retrofit all the golems into these sort of suits they can wear that allow them to animate and walk around, and it's because the dungeon is to a dwarven god, Dugmaren Brightmantle, who is all about creation and invention. And they sort of leave the dungeon alone for a while, and they kind of do lots of other missions and solve lots of other problems in the area. They discover these drake spawn. At least they think they're drake spawn, but they are just creatures from the Wildwood that are these little weasels. And the weasels apparently have this, random magical ability to exorcise things and destroy undead, which is really powerful. There's like 500 of these things. And they, rather than, the players think they're supposed to kill all these weasels, but then when they realize what they can do, they realize there's probably a much better strategy, which would be to try to tame them. And so they try to collect the weasels and tame them and use a lot of their animal tamer abilities to sort of recruit the weasels and get them to be helpful. Simultaneously, they're also dealing with a bunch of these weird pigeon creatures. Pigeons are, also, these are true drake spawn, very aggressive, and they can just fly at you at extreme speeds and smash into people and do tons of damage, and very tough to kill, and are quite aggressive. But they manage to, because of some of the items that they have, make it so that the birds can't really attack them, and so they can kind of capture them all, and they try to recruit those birds too, because they realize that the birds can remove charm on things, and they can and they're resistant to mental effects, and that would be really useful to have a bird that can go around and remove charms on people. So they're thinking maybe we'll recruit these too. So they have lots of people who have bird-related backstories, people who have traits of how to train different animals and drake spawn. And so they start training these creatures, who then become pets that they take around with them to help them, exorcise demons, destroy undead. And apparently somebody really doesn't like this, because they start killing off these animals. Like something tries to murder all these little weasels and tries to murder the pigeons, because apparently these things are really dangerous to the infernals. And so they're doing all this. They're fighting on the front lines. They're trying to take out more troops, but they keep on getting sort of sabotaged at the last minute. They have weird effects where they're getting these weird curses on their limbs that are causing them to lose their use of their limbs semi-permanently. They seem to get some sort of weird effects, so they can't use their legs or things, and they're starting getting crippled all over the place, but they don't know exactly how that's happening or what it is. They suspect some sort of secret spy group that Dagged Rast uses, or Infernals are using, or something. So in the end, they managed to get Sasha, who is one of the adventurers there. She's actually the leader of Daggedmane, and she's just recently gotten onto Crown, and they managed to get her to agree to talk to Crown and get them to get the tools of Ragnarok in here, because it would be really, really useful. And that's kind of the plan. Sword's sort of been planning this for a while, yeah, we should probably do this. And so they tell Crown, and they vote, and Sasha's vote is kind of critical in getting the tools to actually arrive. So they arrive on Friday, the tools arrive on Friday, and they're like, okay, we're going to use these tools to blow up these undead and push everybody back, and maybe save Devil Central. But Sword also knows about this other sort of secret plan, which they know that one of the things they're supposed to do with the tools of Ragnarok is to take them to that anvil, the Ragnor's Forge, where they actually struck the anvil with the hammer of Ragnor's Keep, and that anvil is critical for somehow completing the tools of Ragnarok. And we have to do this, and if we use the tools to fight everything around Devil's Throw, that's great, but we really need to get them to this dungeon. And they've discovered by going and exploring this dungeon a bit that there are these sort of zip lines that they can use in there. Wires that have also been set up, they assume, by some worshippers of Dugmaren Brightmantle, or perhaps the deity himself, that allow you to get to lots of different cities all around Swodland, and maybe it's sort of a high-speed travel system. And so we could just get to Ragnor's Keep if we just use this system, and we could take the tools there. And so they say, that's what we need to do. So they agreed, but they're worried that Rakrosi Centris will not agree to this, because she doesn't want to take some tools to some shrine to do something that isn't confirmed, she wants to use it to protect her city. And so they know they can't really trust all their innkeepers because their innkeepers seem to be very, very compromised. So they're like, so they make a plan. They agree to go and take the tools to go fight on the front lines, and the other group will go and investigate this kind of like other mission they're going to do. They say maybe go to the dungeon or maybe do something else, but they're like, one of us is going to go do this and go fight on the front lines with the tools, and the other group is going to do X other mission that they say they're going to do. But that's not what they actually do. Once they actually set off on the mission, they secretly kind of swap the hammers from group to group. So the group that goes out on the front lines says they have the hammer, but they don't. And the group that is secretly says they're going to go on some other mission they're going to go on actually takes the hammers and then takes off to the dungeon to use the zip line system to get themselves all the way to the Keep of Fragmore. Well, this is both good and bad. They send out, they manage to take the tools and start going down the zip line, and they get to the Keep of Fragmore, and they have a lot of help from a lot of powerful characters on this quest. Some people who have lots of ties to Daggedmain, who are using legendary items to help them get their going, Beastmasters, and all kinds of people who have all kinds of unique powers to get them through this situation into the Keep of Fragmore. And they manage to stay undercover and be undetected while they make their way into the Keep of Fragmore. Well, now the other group though does not have so much luck. They actually, the day before, have just been everybody was completely massacred in this encounter when they ran into a Deathwing Demon Knight, which is this huge, massive being, which looks quite small, but actually on the ethereal plane is just a huge demon creature. Has a Morganti, empty face, like a helmet type face, where it just seems to be devouring the world, and huge tendrils expanding all the way throughout the entire encounter. Anything that tries to go ethereal in that encounter is just killed Morganti immediately. And they encounter this thing and they get absolutely, destroyed by all of its minions. It has tons of ghouls which are just eating everything. And they almost all completely PD there, but luckily some of them get captured. And so this happened to them the day before, and now they're out, they're on the front lines. They want to rescue their friends, but they don't know how to get their friends back because they're all been captured. And so now they're out on the front lines and they have no tools or Fragmalican. And the people, the military has sent them to the front lines thinking that they have this tool that turns off Morganti and makes all undead cowardly, and so they've sent them to the most dangerous and horrifically awful location in the battle, thinking that, well, this will be easy because you've got the tools of Fragmalican. So just take out these 3 guys with Morganti and all these undead since you got the tools. And they realize they may have, this is kind of the sad part of their plan, that even though they, did get the tools to the people to be on their special quest, they are now in a situation where they're expected to perform way above their ability. So they get kind of wrecked. They manage to do fairly well, even given the circumstances, but they are really getting trashed there, taking heavy losses while the tools are gone. And they want to rescue their friends, but they don't know how. But they have here that the Deathwing Demon Knight is coming to them and assaulting them, and has captured all their friends and is dragging their friends, corpses and turned into ash, in boxes that it's dragging along with it just to taunt them. And they're like, great, this is going to be wonderful. We have to fight that thing, and we don't have the tools of Fragmalican. But, oh well. So, luckily for them, the adventurers who went on this quest into the keep managed to get their way through the Keep of Fragmore and through the dungeons, because some of them have been there before in Wednesday League, and they managed to find their way to the main room. They have to fight this outer plane slime creature that they fought before, and it seems to devour parts of your soul. And they managed to defeat that thing, and very, very difficult fight. Also, all of them being compromised by the fact that they cannot leave encounters when they're wielding the tools of Fragmalican. And they managed to get into the main anvil room, and then and they're encountering all these Morganti creatures, but they all just seem to fall asleep around the tools of Fragmalican. And since they dampen Morganti, and so these Morganti bears and this Morganti wolf that are usually sort of the terrifying guardians of the area are all kind of asleep, and so they just get their way in, and they come to the anvil again, which has these sort of odd symbols around it, or sort of odd painting symbols, and they know they need to change the symbols in some way, and then strike the anvil with the tools, but there's all this lava that's kind of making it too hot to get close enough, and they managed to, luckily have somebody who has a power that allows them to get close enough to the anvil to kind of interact with it. And they've made these special rings that they think relate to love, and they think that that's part of the solution to this problem, is that they have to invoke the kind of true name of love in this case, and which one of them happens to know from long ago when he had an encounter up near Dagdian territory with this similar situation, and that also was the thing that he had to resolve there as well. So they managed to put these on the altar. They adjust the things, and they strike the tools onto the anvil, and the tools are absorbed into the anvil, and they feel like a great change in the world. And then they have to decide, do they take the rings with them or do they leave the rings? And they're not really sure what to do there, but they just don't have much time. So they immediately, the lava begins to overflow out of the forge area, and they sort of are running in 3 different directions at the same time, and then decide they're just going to get out of there. So they just take off, and they take off out of the room, and the room fills with lava, and the mithril rings are left inside that on the forge, and they escape, and they manage to get their way out. But they're like, hey, we succeeded. And then to get back to Delphos Mithril, instead of traveling because it's going to take too long, they use an elder sorcery that their beastmaster has, who has a drake familiar, and he uses his this ability that elder sorcery is created to sort of dream walk, which is where you basically create a vision, and you go into the vision, and then you sort of have to travel throughout the vision and try to find your way in the dream to the place you want to get to, and then leave the dream there. And so he's created this spell to do this, and it seems to be working. And they managed to dream walk their way back to Delphos Mithril and navigate their way through that situation. But of course, it's far more dangerous than maybe they realized, this dream walking effect, because it gets very unpredictable. So they do manage to get back to Delphos Mithril, and they discover that all of their friends have been just horrifically trashed while they're trying to wait for them to get back, and they've taken heavy losses, and they're just being totally destroyed. And now luckily they've shown back up, and they discover that many of the people that have come back from the Delphos Mithril Forge have new powers. They have this power that all undead are cowardly to them, and they can just run up to an undead, strike the undead, and it has to run away, which usually doesn't happen to undead. And they're like, now that they have this power, they're like, well, maybe we can help you guys out fighting these undead because they're all cowardly to us, and this is kind of cool. They also discovered that there's other big changes to Morganti in general, that Morganti can now be exercised, and normally if you try to exercise Morganti, it just causes huge, horrific damage to the world. But that if you exercise an undead, if you exercise a Morganti sword or a spirit of a Morganti, that it can leave the world and it won't cause this sort of damage. And that they also have discovered that you have to use a legendary item when you do this, or else it won't work. They also discovered that all legendary items have the ability to move damage that you've taken from Morganti around on your body to a different location or a more advantageous place, that just like the tools of Ragnarlaken could do. They discover that they have healed some grievous wound in the world, that Morganti was surging out again. There might have been another Morganti surge, but they've now put that away, and the power for Morganti to bleed into the other world has ended. And so they have a great victory here, but we still have to deal with Daggedrask and the Infernals. So they go out onto the battlefield, and they confront the Deathwing Demon Knight, which, given their new powers, that it's cowardly to them, to some of them anyway, is much easier to deal with, because they can strike it and it has to run away, and it's constantly being harassed by them, and they can just fight it as a bunch, and it's far less dangerous in this sort of situation. And they manage to end up defeating it and killing it and exercising it, which also doesn't cause rifts in the world, because now the person that exercised it is using a legendary item, and that just puts it away. So they're realizing that now they have a real line of attack here. So kind of mixed results on that situation. Definitely amazing success, but they took heavy losses in the north, and Devilsmith are really struggling there. But the main win was the Tools of Ragnarokkin. They also discovered that that the Tools of Ragnarokkin do still sort of exist. They sort of exist in this place where they can be summoned from. You can summon them, and then they go back to wherever that place is. And to summon them, you have to sacrifice this very basic item called a dagger of Stonehammer, which is just a really simple dagger that was made years ago by Lord Eric Stonehammer, which you just gives you one ability, Might Strike, which you only have for a 20 count, and just has a flaw of whenever your mana drains, you die. And they thought this is considered to be one of the most junk items that you could find. Usually, there was a lot of them made a long time ago, but not many left. And people sort of find uses for them. Like, yeah, it is kind of useful to fight an undead, maybe, but really, it's kind of not that useful. In the end, they discovered that now that weapon is extremely valuable. You can sacrifice that weapon, and it will summon the Tools of Ragnarokkin. And then, if you have the tier to use the Tools of Ragnarokkin, you could then use them to blow up a whole host of undead, or at least your friends could, while you make all the undead cowardly and turn off Morganti if there's any Morganti, and heal some Morganti. There's tons of stuff you could do with it. Of course, it only exists for one counter, and then it goes back to wherever the Tools of Ragnarokkin are being stored. So that was all a big win for them. So that brings us to the Club League right before the final camp. So at the Club League right before the final camp, they were confronting a very dangerous situation involving the Guthurros Angelungwe, which I mentioned before in this wrap-up. So the Guthurros Angelungwe is this mirror demon, which they discovered at the end was the product of an item that had been made by someone years ago, a Morganti mirror-like device that was supposed to allow this person to create Morganti items better by summoning Morganti spirits out of the Morganti plane, maybe, or at least seeing into the Morganti plane so they could maybe bring the right kind of spirits out. But apparently there was a dangerous fumble with this item. It's already a terrifying item to create, and then apparently it fumbled really badly and created this mirror that was extremely dangerous to use. And the mirror would have been dangerous enough on its own, but due to the uprising of the Enchanted, where all magic items that were of a certain tier became animate and went off and became item spirits and did whatever they wanted to, this Morganti mirror was of that tier and became animate and became its own entity. And it's actually been out doing all kinds of horrific things in the world for hundreds of years in my game world, and has been sort of corrupting and taking over and controlling Morganti all over the place for hundreds of years. One of the first things that it co-opted was the Dark Horse mirror, because it can control anything that's reflective or mirror-like, and was gathering Morganti item spirits to itself and controlling them. And there have been lots of for many seasons, people have encountered hints and clues about this being, and that different Morganti creatures that say they're being controlled by this thing, and they don't want to be, but they are, and that Morganti, this creature, keeps controlling them, and certain characters who've been having lots of interactions with the Dark Horse mirror and its maliciousness and attaching itself to people and then trying to solve it. And so at this event, the adventurers have to go up against this most horrific creature, the Guthurros Angelungwe. And the being itself, Laura Whitelocks and Electrobosium both have approached trying to fight the thing, the two most powerful mages on the continent, and both of them have said they can't do it, mostly because it's a mirror demon. So it reflects whatever you bring to approach it. So the more powerful you are when you attack the thing, the more powerful it becomes. It also doesn't necessarily forget what you did to it, so it just absorbs that and learns it. So it's extremely dangerous, especially if you're a really powerful mage. So they don't really think they're going to be able to defeat it. And so they check with a party and they say, who here do we have who can defeat themselves, basically? And also, who do we have who, what party could we send where there's no one person in the party that's so powerful that no one could defeat them? Because if that's the case, we lose. Like if you're super, super powerful and it reflects you, and then your reflection will just murder everyone and no one will be able to beat you. So you can't send anyone who can't be beat, because we all need to be able to beat that person if they approach us. So they have to do a whole bunch of winnowing down of who can go and who cannot. And they eventually decide on a team, which is debatable whether or not there was nobody on the team that could be beat, that they all could beat. But they kind of felt like maybe they had a team that would work that way. But it was extremely lethal mission, so many people just decided not to go because they just didn't want to get completely destroyed. But the people that went were willing to risk their lives to actually maybe solve this major, major problem. As far as they know, if they hadn't solved this, basically all the work they had done in the Tools of Ragnaröken and the Hammer of Ragnar's Keep and the rebuilding of the Tools of Ragnaröken and the anvil and all of it probably would have unraveled and not have been permanent. It would have been temporary. All those effects would have been temporary because the Mirror Demon would have just eventually unworked all of that. And so it seems like people have been trying to do all of these things, but the Guthuros and Galungwe keeps undoing all of the work they do. So they have to go and actually kill this thing. So they send their friend people in to go fight the thing, and the Mirror Demon creature, and it's this horrific battle, just absolutely most lethal battle that any of them ever have run by far. And fortunately they have some of the Tools of Ragnaröken, but they choose to not use the Tools of Ragnaröken because they only have so many daggers of Stonehammer that they can use up to summon it. So they decide to save them for later and initially start without using them, which debatably I think they regretted later, because they realized that maybe if they had used the tools first, they could have learned a lot in a more safe mode. And they could have checked to discover what the thing could do and how its powers were, while it couldn't do Morganti. But instead, they chose to fight it in its full Morganti mode while it was still when they first encountered it. So they were going in blind and also dealing with Morganti, and so they lost several of their friends in that battle. But they did trigger some effects that only trigger off of permanent death, and so managed to become a little more powerful. I'm not sure that trade was worth it, but they did continue to fight, and they were battling these things, and it became worse and worse because the more they would try to bring to bear to defeat the things, the more it would learn what they had and use those same things back at them and just absolutely destroy them. And in the end, they are on the verge of a victory that they just couldn't quite break through, and there's a riddle that they engaged in with the mirror, with the Dark Horse mirror, which was connected to some of the adventurers, and who had made a connection with this being. Because at the Devil's Mithril camp, there were two individuals who were there who had a connection with the Dark Horse mirror. They're certain one of them had sort of become a Gorgon at one point, and had realized that there was a connection to the mirror and had become blind because of this. And the other one has been having the Dark Horse mirror sort of haunt them for a very long time. And so they took this action at the end of the Devil's Mithril camp to sort of basically kind of almost like sacrifice themselves, or at least that they were sort of attempting to sort of sacrifice themselves, maybe with the idea that that by doing so they could destroy the Dark Horse mirror, because if the Dark Horse mirror was not attached to them and they didn't exist, then maybe the Dark Horse mirror doesn't exist, or it's not clear what the intention of the person is because they're gone now. But it did definitely have this effect, maybe an unseen effect, which is that it released this being that they came to know as Vision, which was sort of a reversal of the Dark Horse mirror. The Dark Horse mirror being a nightmare, and this being a vision, meaning maybe the opposite of that. And that it was sort of a unicorn-like creature, kind of goldeny, with golden horns and a sort of spirally looking horn that was Astamori type of effect on it. So they decided they're going to deal with this the Dark Horse mirror and Vision, and they try to bring Vision into the encounter to try to deal with the Dark Horse mirror. And it kind of works because Vision doesn't exactly reflect the same way as everything else. Vision things that Vision does don't necessarily reflect on everything, but attacks that Vision is doing are sort of having a reflective effect, and that's really problematic. And so they can't quite figure out how to use Vision to like solve the whole situation, but they get close. And in the end, they can't quite answer the riddle, and they need to, so they fail the riddle, so they can't get in that way, and they're about to all lose everything. And that's when Vision, who actually has the spirit of this person, this adventurer who is still sort of there, has to make a decision and decides to leave the world and escape into the Wildwood. And her hope is that if she leaves and goes into the Wildwood, that she takes the Dark Horse Mirror with her, because it is her shadow, and her shadow will follow her. And she's right. That actually is the solution. She ends up going into the Wildwood, having the Dark Horse Mirror follows her as her shadow, and that removes a major element of what the Guthuros Anglungwe actually has, all of its sort of minions, its ability to protect itself. And because the Dark Horse Mirror is giving it tremendous support and power. And so the Dark Horse Mirror is gone, and so is Vision, but this allows them to sort of break through into the inner sanctum area of where the actual Guthuros Anglungwe is. So they break into there, and in this space, things are a little bit more malleable. One of the beings that's in there is Erwin, who is the remade sword of Ebenafter, and in his new form. And he is a being now. He's sort of he's been ruling as a sort of guardian, or maybe lord or some sort of Ilionos. And he's a suit of armor, but sort of almost an empty suit of armor, and or like a more sort of Morplate like being. But he's still Morganti, but it's armor. He's Morganti armor. He's not a weapon exactly, but he's sort of considered to be sort of a demigod of some type of that region, and he's been of course now corrupted by the Guthuros Anglungwe. He's been fighting it for a long time. They've been trying to get him to break free of this. Last season, they actually had to kind of break him free of this control, and discovered that's when they discovered that he even existed, really. And now he's been controlled again. So he's in there, and many of them have had an interaction with him to try to keep him from becoming totally controlled. That has caused all of them to become tied to his fate, so that if he dies and PDs or is otherwise destroyed by this creature, all of them will die. And so they're forced to be cut sort of into a bind where they're having to fight a being that if they destroy it, they all die, but if they don't destroy it, they all die. So they're sort of stuck in this situation. But Erwin is sort of has some control and is able to kind of try to work against the controls that the Guthuros Anglungwe is controlling them on them. And so they are he's sort of pulling on the reins and trying not to kill all of his allies who are trying to rescue him, just because he's being told to do so. And in this space, as they're trying to approach the Guthuros Anglungwe, they begin to try tactics that sometimes work against powerful beings like this, or demonic creatures like this, which are less about attacking the being through raw physical force, but using sort of more metaphysical approaches. And some of the Dreamweavers who are there use some of their ability to affect dreams and the dreamlike state of this being to sort of depower the creature and make it less present. They also use the tools of Ragnarlaken in this case to sort of make it cowardly to them. It is an undead, unlike all of its minions, which drastically changes the encounter. Also, they've also learned a lot from fighting it for so long. It took literally hours and hours and hours to do the first several battles, and so they managed to then know how to deal with this thing, and begin to sort of on an instinct, they decide to try to defeat the creature using the actual tools of Ragnarlaken. And it costs you honor to even make an attack. with the tools of Ragnarok, which suggests that you shouldn't do it, is what they think. They think, well, that costs honor, so we shouldn't do it. But what they discover is that that's actually one of the tests of the tools of Ragnarok, is are you willing to spend honor to use them against a thing? Because they do have abilities when you do. And so they actually end up spending honor, striking this creature with the tools of Ragnarok, which ends up rapidly shrinking it, taking it down in power is each time they do it. So its power level is actually just diminishing. Rather than actually dealing any damage to it, it's actually just sort of shrinking it and making it a less and less powerful being overall. And so they managed to shrink it in power level to something much more manageable. By the end, they can actually fight using the tools of Ragnarok to shrink it down smaller and smaller and smaller until they actually can defeat the creature itself. And when they do, they discover something they weren't maybe not expecting. As the thing sort of is destroyed, they find themselves in a sort of space where they're confronting death. There's a being that they've encountered. They all recognize it as death. It has several tools out in front of it. It has a sort of strange skull, a cup or a chalice that has plants growing all along it, and also sort of a strange hand that is made of bone, and that is holding a deck of cards. It seems to have many cards that are laid out in front of it, and it's speaking to them, and it tells them something about some sort of agreement that has been broken in the world, and that they have, now attempted to replace it, and that the Guthuros and Galungwe's presence in the world, and is due to this breakage of this pact. And that if they are to keep the Guthuros and Galungwe out of this world and all of its minions, and maybe the whole Morganti world, that they have to keep some sort of agreement that they haven't kept, or something is broken. They have to keep this thing from breaking, and it involves what they're doing, but they're not really sure because Death doesn't speak in a very overt way. It's very opaque and hard to understand all the things that Death is speaking about. So they manage to infer that they need to do something here, and they sort of agree that they're going to make some sort of pact with Death, and that they will, take some actions they're supposed to take, and they can make choices about how they're going to interact with these cards, which seem kind of similar to the cards they ran into at the Anvil. So they decide that what they're going to do is, rather than move the cards that are sort of in the rear, they're going to actually swap out one of the main cards in the front. And so they do so, and Death is seen to shuffle the cards and then draw out, or spread out rather the cards to them, and they select one, blindly, whatever this card is. Well, the card ends up being an image of a person holding up their hands, which all seem red, and which they have dubbed the bloody hands card. And Death seems pleased by this result. Death seems to be saying that the hands, that one has blood on their hands, and that this is a sign of what their understanding of what death means to them. The other card, which is left in front of them, is what they call the Golden Horse card, which has an image of a horse and someone sort of dancing or perhaps becoming a bird on it. And Death says these two cards are something that they must make the pact with, and they have to make the pact relating to these two cards. And so they end up, leaving that situation, finding themselves back in the more material world, and not sure what to do about this effect, but they have realized that they've changed some things. They seem to have made this pact, and then when they have to decide what the pact does, and then more things will be resolved once they do, and that, but they have sort of put away a great, powerful Morganti presence, and that Morganti is now, somewhat that is lessened, and they may have solved some major Morganti effect in the world, but they'll find out. So they end up the two Dreamweavers that were in the encounter are the two that must make the pact, and so they have a very short period of time, less than 24 hours, to kind of come up with what the effect is going to be. And they choose to, they have two effects that they have to decide what these two things do. So the Bloodied Hands card, they decide the effect of that is going to be that whenever anyone pulls from Death's bag, if they get 5 red stones, they gain a power. They will gain a basic rank 1 standard ability that they saw used in the encounter when they died, and that is a sort of a gift that death is maybe perhaps giving them. The second card, the Golden Horse, they recognize has something to do with the Dark Horse Mirror in general, and that the Dark Horse Mirror was maybe enslaved when it should have been perhaps befriended, and that they don't want this to happen again, and they understand that needs to be something that they reflect here. So they choose an ability, which is that if for the Golden Horse card, that if anyone who does not love another person but is bound to them in some way. So if you're bound to someone who you do not love, and then you die and pull from the bag, the death bag, that when you take that action, the pulling from the bag breaks that binding, but it does through an effective exorcism, which destroys undead, would remove any sort of controls or bindings or effects on you, and will cause you to die, although it doesn't destroy the body of a living person, but it still kills a living person and causes the person to have to pull many more stones out of the bag than usual. This is pretty harsh, but they have a theory that this will completely destroy the Dark City and many undead, and they're willing to take the risk that this effect could be very beneficial, even though it's quite harsh. So this unlocks another effect. Once they've chosen the two things, they discover that there is a whole list of things which they must choose from now. There's a list of flaws, basically, and a list of benefits, and they have to choose whether they want to have benefits and flaws and how many. And they decide that right away that they need to have less benefits than flaws, and that's going to be important here because they don't want to depower the effect that they've all done all this work for. And so the benefits that they choose are that Morganti spirits cannot re-enter this world. Once they go back, if they try to come into this world, they are blocked. And they also choose this effect, which causes Morganti spirits to be unable to live within a mastercrafted item, that they will no longer be able to reside within an item and it's not a suitable home for them. And I think these are the two most critical effects that they could choose there. And rather than picking a lot of effects, since they only have so much space, they pick the third one they pick is the one which they just know is unknown. It's an effect that they think is open, which means that perhaps they're leaving space for death or whoever to choose an effect that they would like to choose. And so for benefits, or for flaws rather, they choose, there are many they must pick. They choose an effect which makes anyone who pulls from the bag, who picks even one stone, lose more of their memory than usual and forget an entire session's worth of knowledge. They pick an effect that makes it such that when someone pulls from the death bag and they pull even one black stone, they lose one of their honor for the encounter, and that if the next time they pull a black stone again, they lose the honor for the day. They also choose an effect where when someone tries to pull from the death bag, if they don't pull any black stones at all, they actually the bag remembers how many times they've died, and the next time they will pull that much more again, the amount that they had before, until they actually get a black stone. So it can mean that you end up pulling quite a few stones in a pull that could be potentially lethal. They also pick the effect they also pick the unknown effect, which is that they want to leave something open-ended for perhaps death or someone else to fill in there, and they end up choosing these flaws of things that they wish to affect, that are now all affecting the death bag and making it more dangerous to be pulling from the death bag, but they think this is a worthwhile choice given that all the benefits that they have. They think all of these things are worthwhile to risk. So that brings us to the last camp, which is the Pinnacle camp. And so the adventurers find themselves in Pinnacle, and they discover that their innkeeper is not Embarcarius or Laura Whitelocks or any of the usual innkeepers that are in Pinnacle. But Joy Hazelgrove is actually their innkeeper for a few minutes, when she leads them to this other young woman who's a white-haired, young teenage girl who some of them seem to know and recognize as Elzib, the dragon who actually is psionic. And she sort of has this field around her, which is making them sort of shielded from detections and shielded from magical effects and maybe other things they don't know. But she explains to them that they have a special quest that they're going to be on, and that anyone who is in this meeting and who decides to go on this quest, will be shielded by her so that they can't be detected. And anyone who doesn't go is perhaps going to need to either have protections on them or not go on and talk to anyone, because they could give away what they're doing. It's a very secret quest. And their goal is to actually rescue dragons. And she says they've been rescuing dragons all through the whole season, actually. And she was some of the first. They were some of the first that were rescued way back at the beginning by Sword. And that there are many other dragons that need to be rescued. And they've rescued many already, but that they are actually sort of on the verge of a war with other dragons. And that there are dragons attacking Pinnacle. And one of them is this ancient dragon called Volcambion, who they've fought many, many times, and that he's, back and gathering other dragons, and he's ready to assault the island, and he's angry, but there isn't really clear about what he's angry about, just that, he's upset at the island and wants to destroy it. And they're like, well, this is just what Volcambion does. I guess we should just, we'll deal with this, but we also need to rescue the dragons. So Elzeb tells them that she can send them on these big quests. They'll take all day to do most of them, and they need to ask for certain boons from different dragons, several different boons that will protect them from dragons, or just get the dragons to help them in some small way. So they start off on quests, and they head off up to the north, trying to be as efficient as they can with their movement, because it's very hard to travel, and they have to take ships, and they don't want to really teleport a lot because they're afraid they'll get noticed by enemy dragons. And one of the first things that Elzeb does is sort of shield them from the detection of extreme intelligences, so that they can't be noticed as easily by those kinds of intelligences, because she said they'd be murdered immediately by all the dragons that know what they're doing. But because she can shield them, they will sort of operate more like something that is the dragons don't see, which is a very, very powerful ability. But she is the only psionic dragon in existence, so although she is young, so hypothetically they believe this is within her powers. So they take off to the north. They go to Olden Hold. They rescue some young steel dragons there, and they haven't asked for a boon from them yet, but they're planning on it. They decide to keep sailing up north, all the way up towards Delphus Mithril, because they know there's some dragons up there they want to talk to. They manage to get up there and fight their way through, and they manage to encounter some huge ancient dragons. Needle dragons, who apparently are the lords of the dragon armies that they've heard, and they make some sort of bargain, because these dragons are very random, and they agree to a trial to fight Atone, who's a very powerful leader of Daggedrask, and they agree to just one fight, winner take all, and but the terms are sort of secret. They discover, once the battle begins, that the Needle Dragon has sort of put them into a difficult situation, because there's an effect on the encounter where only arrows are the only thing that can damage anyone, and no one has thought to bring a bow, not a single person, either side. And so they're really, really in a difficult situation, though, because Atone, who is the sort of the minor deity of the Daggedrask people, his sword can count as any weapon he wants it to. And so, consequently, he is able to go around and kill people, even though no one else has any bows. So they just sort of get wrecked. Luckily, they don't end up completely losing. It ends up sort of being a draw, because the time runs out, and there are still some of them up. So it's sort of a draw, but they don't get the dragons they want. So they end up retreating, and they decide to send just one of their individuals who might be able to talk to these dragons and maybe coax these dragons into some sort of agreement. That ends up working through some incredible skill by this particular individual, who ends up like catching arrows in a cup that the dragons gave them, and ends up saying, I'll do the trial just myself, and ends up going on doing this trial and then winning it with just the aid of some random other dwarves that the dragon picked up. Wins the trials, and secures some aid from the dragons. Not as much aid as they maybe could have, like not the dragons' armies or anything of that nature, but just a boon. And the adventurers decide, this is great, let's see what we can do. And the adventurers decide the boon that they're going to ask for is the ability to move long distances. And so the dragon, Tetragrade, ends up giving them his bow, which allows them to then fit the party to the bow and launch themselves across the map at extreme distances. This allows them to then travel, of course, much more efficiently, and they end up traveling across the map, trying to find more and more dragons, and rescuing more and more dragons, getting more and more boons from them. But one of the boons they ask for from the two young steel dragons quite at the very beginning is to help them in some small way. Well, that turns out to be eggs, these small little stone eggs that they give them, and all of them carry around the eggs, and they travel in the wildwood for a long time, trying to kind of increase the time that they've spent with the eggs to kind of bond with them better. And they finally the eggs hatch, and they have these little mini fairy dragons in them, which attach quickly to them, and each of them is unique. They're all different common types of dragons, but each of their powers that they have is unique. All 45, 50 of these dragons, all with different unique powers, and each one is sort of guarding and trying to learn to be friends with these different adventurers. All of them have unique behaviors and traits, and they quickly bond with all these dragons, and then start wildwood tracking through all kinds of forests, trying to find more and more dragons. They go up into the dark wilds, and they end up encountering a dragon called Summersong, who they try to rescue. She's a black dragon, but she's in conflict with this other dragon called Zazaroth, who's a gold dragon, a very powerful one, and a huge, dangerous dragon. And he's, hunting her down, trying to kill her, or at least trying to capture her. And she is trying to defeat him, and she's very frustrated with him. But she says, I could just escape with you right now because you have Tetragrade's bow. We could just go. But, I would prefer to confront Zazaroth and actually try to defeat him, because I'm a chromatic dragon and he's a gold, and as a chromatic dragon I have status, and I could probably defeat him in a battle of tooth and claw, because I'm allowed to use Elder Sorcery in that, although only Necromancy, and he is not, because that's not innate to him. I think, I might be able to take him, even though he's much more powerful. And even if he does disagree, I might be able to affect him because he's acting very out of his honor, and I could make him, lose honor by doing this. So they agree that this is risky, but they're going to do it. So they help her to go fight Zazaroth. They manage to defeat some of his minions, and once they do, she ends up fighting Zazaroth in a battle of tooth and claw, which is a dragon duel, which must be done with with only your innate powers as a dragon, and none of the other sorceries, so you don't end up blowing up the whole countryside, and also none of your usually trained abilities either. And so they end up fighting for a while, very intense fight, but in the end, Summersong does end up defeating Zazaroth, but it really comes very, very close, and really only wins because she's fast. She's faster than him, and can kind of outpace him as he's chasing her down, trying to murder her in his final fury. She sort of wins, and they discover that this is sort of a jilted lover situation, and that Summersong is sort of actually upset at Zazaroth because he kind of stood her up in some sort of agreement they had, which they sort of think is kind of interesting. But but she does say that this is good because she's going to change Zazaroth. He actually is very evil at this time, but that's not his true nature. So they're like, okay, well this is great. They get their boons. Now they can get two boons, one from Summersong and one from Zazaroth, which they weren't expecting. And then they decide to go and try to go back to Pinnacle, kind of check in, see what they can do. So they go back to Pinnacle, check in, and they decide that they probably need to do is maybe do some of these smaller missions they've been ignoring. So they go off on some of these sort of small quests. They manage to pick up this little sort of a mutant dragon called Bubbles from Spireguard, who is sort of small and almost fairy-like, and he seems to be some sort of dream dragon that's not the usual type, sort of very pearlescent. And they were just going to leave him there and go on another quest, but they decide, no, we really need to not leave him alone. Like, he seems to be very fragile, and maybe other dragons will want to hunt him down. So with us, he's safe, but outside of us, he's maybe in great danger. So they take him across to Pinnacle. They managed to solve a bunch of other problems around town with rebels and things, defeating different those groups to kind of calm down the situation. And then they decide to take on this little quest, another sort of side quest involving the Suthen lore, which is a very strange forest, and that there's a sign of some sort of a weak dragon sign there, and they're not sure what it means, but they should probably investigate it. So they decide to go to Suthen lore, and they go. Everybody goes, and they start to poke around, and they discover this sort of old tomb, and it seems to have some sort of old, maybe Elven or 99 Alliance tomb. And then they start to explore it, and they discover that it's maybe... it's already been raided, everything's been taken out of it, but they're still going to do it anyway, because where's this dragon sign coming from? And so they keep going into the dungeon, and it seems very simple. It's only a few rooms around. It seems to be more of a tomb, really. And they manage to open up the tomb, and it's sort of already been done. Like, the stuff's out of it, and there's nothing left. But they are getting a weird signal, and all their little mini Drakes are really freaking out now, and kind of all their scales are on their ends, and they're really scared to go into this place. But they managed to realize that what's going on is that the tomb has a false bottom. That basically that the stone that everything was on is actually just a false, and they could probably lift this up, and they managed to open up its trap, but only the person who basically has defeated the main guardian can open it, and that happens to be one of their little Drakes, which actually ended up killing this golem. So they open it up, and there's this strangely odd heat emitting from this ninjutsu sword with that seems to have this white mithril in it, and there's also an old ratty cloak and some leather armor with mithril lining, and they're what is this thing? I don't know. And they decide they're gonna maybe but all their Drakes are starting to get sort of lightheaded, and they're starting to maybe start to pass out, and one of their people is sort of lying on one of the Drakes is lying on the ground and kind of starting to go into seizures, and they're I don't know what's going on, and some of them immediately think something's wrong and leave the room and try to take off with their Drakes because they're this is not safe. But some of the other ones just hang around thinking that maybe something else is up, and they end up finally getting someone who doesn't have a Drak to pick up the sword and see what it does. And the moment they do, all the Drakes in the room die. They're get killed. Their mana is all gone, and they don't have enough to sustain how much gone it is. It's drastically gone, and they're all of course upset and sad. They're going to resurrect their Drakes, but this is horrific, and they don't know what this thing is. The sword seems to want to corrupt them, wants to make them do horrible things. It wants to kill everybody in the room. It seems very, very dangerous. But they're but this is a powerful sword. They think they know what it is. They think it's Korokon, which is this ancient legendary sword that is considered to be maybe the first legendary weapon made by the Dark Elves far to the north. And they think, okay, well, maybe we should this thing's really powerful. What do we do with it? So they manage to finally get it to someone who can kind of interact with the spirit that's inside of it. And it starts sending him, sort of symbols of what it can do, but he doesn't understand the symbols at all. And he can't really seem to get information from it. So they realize they have to maybe decode what it can do before they can use it, and that's really hard. And they're terrified to take this thing anywhere. If they take it back to Pinnacle, maybe they're going to start a war with more dragons. They don't know what it can do. They can do, but they don't want to move it around, because what if it kills people, or what if they take it back and it kills other people? They don't know, and so they're really concerned about what to do with this weapon. So in the end, they decide to actually just call in the officials, and they manage to send themselves back to Pinnacle, a small group, tell Laura Whitelocks, and Embarcari's like, we think we found this thing, but we don't know what to do with it. The teachers at Pinnacle, of course, freak out, and they're like, okay, like, we'll be right there, like, we'll help you. And then Laura Whitelocks and Sen show up and rapidly try to secure the area, displace them back, and space fold them back to Pinnacle with the weapon, and cover their tracks to make sure that nobody knows what's going on. And that seems to work miraculously. It's very hard, a very difficult series of magical actions to do, but they luck out and manage to not leave almost any tracks of what they did. And so they move the sword, and then they start trying to decode what it does. Well, they realize they're running out of time now. They just don't know what are we going to do now, because like we still have more dragons to save, and we just don't have much time left. And so they decide that we're going to shoot ourselves using the bow of Tetragrade all the way out to Dagged Main, and we'll try to go get these red dragons that are up there, these ancient red dragons. So they launch themselves there. They travel through the Wildwood to get there, meet these red dragons, but the red dragons don't seem to pay any attention to them. They seem to be kind of in a trance. And at first they think it's some sort of magical trance caused by demons, and in the end they discover that the two dragons are just madly in love with each other, and they can't think about anything else. And so they manage to finally realize that they have to communicate to the dragons using only references to the other dragon, and that seems to be how they actually end up communicating to them. And they get these two dragons to sort of help them, along with two other black dragons that have sort of been caught in the spell of this of their attraction to each other. And they sort of help these dragons get a boon from these dragons. Ask one dragon to go and protect Pinnacle. Ask the other one for the final boon that they need, which is a boon involving being able to be less predictable, so that they can fight dragons. And they agree, and then manage to also get another boon from the black dragon, but they use that to send one of their adventurers, who is sort of connected to the Dagdamar in ways that are, they're not really sure how they connect, but they send them far into the north to try to complete a quest that has been ongoing for many, 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 many years. So they realize that they go back to Pinnacle, and they think, well, we're done. We've got all the boons. Let's fight some dragons. But the black dragons, though, that they ran into up in Dagged Main seem to be talking about something that's got them all on edge. It sounds like something is off or something is wrong, and it's sort of in the ways that dragons speak, which is often hard to interpret. It's very prophecy-like. They have this feeling that they have a key that they don't know how to fit it, and that they have it, but it's fading. They don't know what to do with it. And they realize that we're supposed to go fight these dragons. We've got all these boons that allow us to do this. But then they were sort of realizing there's still two dragons they haven't rescued, and they're like, well, we just don't have time. I guess those dragons will have to just fend for themselves. And they're thinking, I guess what we need to do is, just fight some dragons that here in Pinnacle and protect Pinnacle. But then it occurs to some of them who start to think about the situation that the two dragons that they haven't rescued are both platinum dragons. And they haven't run into any platinum dragons in all of these things they've done. There are no platinum dragons in Pinnacle at the time. None of them have encountered any platinum dragons this whole time, and that the only two platinum dragons that they've run into are these two. Both of them very young, and both of them very fragile. One younger than the other, but both of them still being harried and in danger. And so suddenly it occurs to them that, maybe their purpose is not to be the fighters who defend Pinnacle, but to be those who rescue the children in need. And that's maybe more important. And they sense that what they're actually being asked by Elzeb as she's discussing with us, and she's trying to figure out what to do next, is that it has more to do with what their nature is, and that each of them has a deep nature that they need to follow, and that that's what they should be figuring out, is who are you, is basically what she says. Who are you, and what is it that you will do in this moment? And they decide that they're running out of time, and that they have to take drastic action, or urgent action rather, and they decide that they must save one of these two platinum dragons, and that's actually the critical action. And so they launch themselves off one final time down to the Grey Isles, and where there's a platinum dragon that's sort of trapped between the Grey Isles, which is a non-divine zone, and often disrupts beings like platinum dragons' abilities to function very well, and the Daprakrula, who are magical controlling beings that can take over any magical being, including dragons, and that's probably what the problem is. And they managed to launch themselves into the encounter, but they've sort of miscalculated because they haven't thought about the fact that there's just water there, and most of the people that have given them swimming and flying and powers are not present, or they're all gone, they've PD'd or passed on, and so they don't have those assets anymore, and so they end up in the ocean drowning, except for just a few of them who can survive. And so I think they're pretty much all doomed as the Dapper Krula and their minions, swarm the area, chasing this platinum dragon. They're pretty sure they're going to control the platinum dragon in seconds, when one of them sort of rushes out and manages to sort of unsummon the dragon out of the encounter into a sort of a twilight space. You can think of it as a space between spaces where they're just conversing. And they have this ability to talk there for a while and then reappear. And that ability to sort of make them not exist for a while is the perfect thing that they need in that moment, because it takes the dragon out of the access of the Dapper Krula. And even though the Dapper Krula end up fighting the adventurers and killing some of them, and it means that the dragon can't be controlled and used against them or killed. And so they managed to make this agreement with the dragon, who is concerned that all of them are dying. Seems very concerned about the death that is being caused and wants to care for and take care of all the adventurers. But the person who has rescued them says this is something they've all agreed on. They all decided that they would rescue this dragon, even if it meant that they all died. And so the dragon is moved by this. And when they've defeated all the Dapper Krula's minions, the dragon and this adventurer reappear, and they use the bow to send themselves back to Pinnacle, just before they think that the island may be destroyed by Volcanion and all of his other dragons that he's gathered. So once they return, there is a great battle that's happening when many adventurers are out trying to fight off many of the most evil dragons that are attempting to destroy Pinnacle and the island, and it's super tense and difficult to fight dragons in the first place since they're so powerful, but all their boons seem to be keeping them from being just completely annihilated, and they can actually sort of hold off the dragons for a while given all the boons they've received, and many of them are able to defeat. They actually end up killing one of the mithril dragon that was they'd fought for many days and had begun to take actions in different ways against them, and was beginning to maybe doubt whether it should be helping the evil dragons. And they hold off the dragons long enough for something to happen with Elzeb and the other dragons. And so at the very end of the quest, there's those of you who have just returned with the Platinum Dragon, and once the Platinum Dragon is there, something seems to click to all of them, and Elzeb, the Psionic Dragon, meets with Bubbles, this Dreamweaver dragon, and they create sort of a shield around all the dragons that in that area, and that protects them from perhaps effects of other things around the world, or perhaps around other dragons, and they begin this ritual. And in the ritual, the Platinum Dragon takes its place, followed by many other dragons, each of a different type, each of them saying that they are here and that they represent, and each of them is dragons that adventurers have met over the entire course of the season, different dragons that have either saved them, or they have released, or that they have befriended, or that they have encountered, all the different types of dragons. 12 of them take the circle, 2 of them in the middle, that's Elzeb and Bubbles, and then 3 hold a triangle outside of this circle, that is Summersong, the Black Dragon, and Tetragrade, the Needle Dragon, and these 2 Iron Dragons that they did not give their names, but were on the outside of the circle, and representing warriors, semis, and mages. And between all of these, they created a ritual, and the one piece that was critical to completing the circle is that one of the spaces apparently was reserved for one of the little Dracs, the mini Dracs, and that is one of the things that they must have for this ritual to work, and that they need a specific mini Drac, and it must be one of the white dragons. when they checked, many of the people had their dragons still. They had not died, but only one person remained in the group who had a white mini drac remaining. And this person had just completed a trial with the box of many things, or the box of 1,000 things, box of wonders, and had their intelligence increased randomly, and so had their drac. And this one drac is then available to take the space in the circle, to complete it. And they realize that they're shifting something in the world, some great change is occurring, and that there's something in the deep lore of the world is being returned or shifted back in some direction that has been given, and that they realize that dragons have been given a tremendous power that perhaps that they many of the dragons believe they should not have, and that they believe that this power should be placed elsewhere, and that it should be shifted into a new place, and that the adventurers have an opportunity through their dracs to influence this change. And they all debate whether they should decide what the change should be or whether they should not. And in the end, it falls to this one adventurer who has a connection with their one white drac to whether to make this change. And in the end, they were advised to do what comes to them instinctively. What should they do? And they say that they decide that they want their drac to make the decision for themselves. And the drac seems surprised by this, and says that, surprised that you would trust me. And the person says, yes, I do trust you to make the right decision. And so this seems to be inspiring to the drac, who then helps the other dragons to make the decision, and they decide that they seem to imply that the thing that they've chosen has been set. But the drac talks to this one adventurer and says, "Are you okay with magic?" And the adventurer says, "Yes, that seems okay with me." And so the drac says, "Oh, okay, I think that's what we'll do." And so apparently the wheel has shifted, and magic has become the focus of something. And there's a great change in the world, which people are not necessarily clear on what it was, but something does seem to have shifted drastically. And the ritual ends, and all the dragons are absorbed into this ritual and gone. And it's understood that they are not in this world anymore. They are in another place. Wherever that place is not clear necessarily, but that is the place that they exist. They don't seem destroyed in some way. They seem more just sort of inhabiting another zone or a mode, and that this is part of the cost of this spell. That ended our quest, and people seem to realize that perhaps this was actually what the whole war was about. That all the dragons that were assaulting Pinnacle did not want to lose their power, the power that they had been given by this great change in the universe, and that these dragons, the younger generation of dragons, believe that those dragons should not have this power anymore. That dragons in general should not have this kind of effect, and that they need to be in their usual mode. And so they have shifted the wheel to a new place, whatever that means. Okay, so that's the plot wrap-up. Next, I'll be posting a video that's about the projections on what's going to happen in the time jump that's coming up. So that'll be posted probably shortly. All right.